Mark your calendars, 2019 spaceflight events you don't want to miss. In the past year, China launched a spacecraft to the far side of the Moon, and commercial spaceflight firms like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic made important strides in their quest to take their first paying passengers into space. But the coming year promises to be even busier. Among other things, the schedule includes a historic flyby of the most distant object ever visited, the debut of new astronaut capsules and the 50th anniversary of that put humans on the Moon for the first time. "It's going to be incredibly exciting," said Eric Stulmer, president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, an industry group in Washington. "I'm a huge student of history and I adore the whole Apollo era, but that was one of the early chapters, and we're looking at the next chapters in the coming year. Here are the most noteworthy space events scheduled for 2019. All launch dates are subject to change. The was designed to study Pluto. But after its successful rendezvous with the dwarf planet in 2015, the craft, a debris-filled region of the solar system beyond the orbit of Neptune. Here, at a distance of about 4 billion miles from Earth, New Horizons will zoom past the icy object 2014 MU-69, which is nicknamed Ultima Thule, on January 1. The New Year's rendezvous will make Ultima the most distant object ever visited by a spacecraft. On December 7, China launched its robotic Change 4 spacecraft on the robotic lander, and the rover being carried on the craft could touch down as early as January 1 within the South Pole Aitken Basin, one of the Moon's largest and oldest impact craters. The Change 4 mission is a prelude to a successor robotic mission, Change 5, which is designed to return lunar samples to Earth. SpaceX has been developing its Crew Dragon capsule as a replacement for NASA's space shuttles, which were retired in 2011. The new craft is designed to ferry up to 7 astronauts to and from the International Space Station. During its first uncrewed test flight, which is scheduled for January 17, the capsule will launch aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida, dock with the space station and then return to Earth, splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean if it's successful. The Crew Dragon's first test flight with astronauts aboard will follow later in the year. Sometime in the first quarter of 2019, will launch a 1,322-pound lunar lander on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida. After a 2-month journey, the lander will touch down on the Moon, with the earliest landing attempt pegged for February 13. With the mission, Israel hopes to become the 4th nation to land a craft on the Moon, after the US, Russia and China. SpaceEal was formed to compete in Google's Lunar X Prize competition, a now-defunct international contest that offered $20 million to the group that could send the first privately funded spacecraft to the Moon. In March 2018. On January 31, India's space agency will launch its second lunar mission, Chandrayaan-2, sending a robotic orbiter, lander and rover to the Moon. Chandrayaan-2, which will touch down at the lunar South Pole, will study the Moon's mineral content and its topography. India's first lunar mission, Chandrayaan-1, launched in October 2008. That mission. Sometime in February, a London-based startup called OneWeb will launch the first 10 satellites of what ultimately will be a fleet of 600 telecommunication satellites designed to. The satellites will launch aboard an Arianespace Soyuz rocket from the Guiana Space Center in French Guiana. On February 28, a Russian Soyuz rocket will lift off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying NASA astronauts Nick Hague and Kristina Koch and Russian cosmonaut Alexei Ovshin into the ISS. The crew will join 3 space flyers who are already aboard the station. Like SpaceX, Boeing is developing a space capsule to replace NASA's retired space shuttle fleet. Sometime in March, it will take its maiden flight aboard an Atlas V rocket from Cape Canaveral, Florida, with the uncrewed capsule docking with the space station before parachuting back to Earth. If the test is successful, Boeing could conduct in August. SpaceX is on February 6, 2018, lifting off from Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and on its second flight, which is planned for early in 2019, the huge rocket will carry 25 individual payloads for the U.S. military and NASA, including weather satellites and a space radiation experiment. The Falcon Heavy can lift a heavier payload than any American rocket since NASA's Saturn V booster, which carried Apollo astronauts to the Moon in the 1960s and 70s. If the uncrewed test flight of SpaceX's Crew Dragon is successful, the craft will return to space with 2 space flyers aboard. NASA astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken will fly Crew Dragon to the space station. NASA astronaut Anne McClain, Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko will return to Earth in their Soyuz capsule, landing in Kazakhstan sometime in June. China is expected to test the sometime in mid-2019, but a detailed timeline of the mission hasn't yet been revealed. For its first test flight, the reusable 20-ton spacecraft will launch aboard a Chinese Long March 5B rocket without a crew. China currently uses its Shenzhou spacecraft for trips to and from low Earth orbit. On July 20, it will be 50 years since became the first human to step foot on the Moon. As he climbed down the ladder of his lunar module and stepped onto the surface of the Moon in 1969, Armstrong uttered the line that became famous, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Armstrong and his crewmate Buzz Aldrin explored the Moon's surface for almost 3 hours before climbing back into their lunar module and heading home. NASA has After its Change 4 mission to the lunar far side, China will attempt an even more ambitious lunar mission sometime toward the end of the year. Change 5 will include a lander designed to collect samples of lunar rocks and soil and return them to Earth. If successful, it would be the first time materials from the Moon will have been brought back to Earth since 1976. Follow NBC News Mach on, and Denise Chow is a reporter and editor at NBC News Mach.